Before you scroll, before you skip, before you tell yourself, "I'll watch this later," I need you to understand something right now. You were not sent here by luck. There are people in this world who feel it, a weight they carry that others don't see, a fire inside them that refuses to die, no matter how many times life tries to put it out. A voice in the back of their mind whispering, "You were made for something greater than this." If that is you, then this message was written for you, specifically, personally. But here is what nobody is telling you. You are already late. Not tomorrow, not next year. Right now, in this very moment, the version of you that was supposed to rise is still waiting, still sleeping, still asking, "Is it my time yet?" I am here to tell you, it was always your time. What you are about to hear in the next few minutes is not motivation. It is not a pep talk. It is an emergency signal, broadcast specifically to the ones who were chosen to hear it. The only question is, will you finally answer? There are people who spend their entire lives believing that everything happens by accident. They believe success is random, purpose is random, timing is random. They walk through life thinking the universe simply throws blessings at a few lucky individuals while everyone else is forced to survive on scraps. But deep inside you, there has always been a strange feeling that your life was never ordinary. Even when everything around you looked normal, something inside you kept whispering that you were meant for more, not more money, not more attention, not more applause, more meaning. And that feeling did not come from ego. It came from recognition, because the soul remembers what the mind forgets. Long before you understood the pain you would carry, long before the betrayals, the delays, the isolation, the confusion, there was already a mark placed on your life, a signal, a calling, a weight that only chosen people can understand. You were never built to blend in with a sleeping world. That is why your path has felt different. That is why ordinary things never satisfied you for long. That is why even when you tried to settle into comfort, something kept disturbing your spirit. You could feel it in quiet moments, late at night, during conversations that felt empty, during routines that drained your energy. You kept asking yourself why you felt disconnected from a world that everyone else seemed perfectly comfortable living inside. Because your spirit recognizes cages even when they are decorated beautifully. Chosen people often mistake their sensitivity as weakness. But sensitivity is not weakness when it allows you to detect truth before others can see it. You notice things people ignore, energy shifts, false intentions, hidden manipulation, the emptiness behind fake confidence. You can walk into a room and feel what others pretend not to feel. And because of that, life becomes heavier for you. You carry awareness in a world addicted to distraction. People called you overdramatic when you were actually intuitive. They called you difficult when you were actually awake. They called you unlucky when you were actually being redirected, because being chosen does not look glamorous in the beginning. Most of the time, it looks like isolation, rejection, delay, confusion, closed doors, seasons where nothing makes sense, moments where you question your own value because everything around you seems to move while your life remains still. But what if the delay was never punishment? What if it was preparation? A sword is not forged in comfort. Gold is not purified without fire. And people chosen for a greater purpose are rarely allowed to live unconscious lives. The pressure you felt was shaping you. The losses were revealing people who could not go where you were meant to go. The loneliness was teaching you how to hear your own soul without the noise of the crowd. You thought you were falling apart, but in reality, you were shedding identities that were never truly yours. That relationship that collapsed, that opportunity that disappeared, that season where nobody understood you, that pain you begged to escape. Every part of it was forcing you to stop chasing lives that were too small for your calling. Because chosen people suffer differently, not because they are cursed, but because they are being sharpened. Life refuses to let them sleep too deeply inside illusions. Every time they try to betray themselves for acceptance, something inside begins to break. Anxiety rises, emptiness appears, restlessness grows. The soul starts screaming because it knows you are abandoning your path. And still, despite everything, the fire inside you never completely died. Think about that. There were moments you wanted to quit, moments you felt exhausted, moments you thought life had forgotten you. Yet somehow, you kept going. Something kept pulling you forward, even when logic said stop. That is not accidental. Average people can silence their purpose for decades and feel nothing. But chosen people feel restless the moment they abandon who they truly are, because the calling does not leave them alone. It follows them into every distraction, every relationship, every job, every season of hiding. The signal keeps returning. Wake up, pay attention, remember who you are. You were not created merely to survive routines that suffocate your spirit. You were not designed to spend your entire life seeking validation from people who are asleep themselves. You were not chosen to become smaller so others could remain comfortable around you. Your life has always carried a different frequency. That is why you could never fully belong inside shallow conversations, fake ambitions, or empty lifestyles. Your spirit kept searching for depth because it was created for depth. Even your pain had depth. Even your loneliness carried lessons. Even your confusion was leading you toward awareness. Nothing about your journey has been random. Not the heartbreak, not the waiting, not the pressure, not the awakening. You were chosen long before you realized it. There is a kind of pain that nobody talks about, a silent pain. A pain that does not leave bruises on the skin, but slowly drains the spirit from the inside out. It is the pain of waiting, waiting for clarity, waiting for answers, waiting for movement, waiting for life to finally begin while the days keep passing like shadows across a wall. And the worst part about waiting is not the delay itself. It is what the delay makes you believe about yourself. Because after enough closed doors, after enough silence, after enough nights wondering why nothing is changing, people begin to question their worth. They start believing maybe they were forgotten, maybe they missed their chance, maybe everyone else received something special while they were left behind in an unfinished life. But what most people never realize is this: the waiting was never empty. The waiting was the wound. It was the place where your faith was tested, your identity was challenged, your spirit was stretched beyond comfort. Because waiting changes people, slowly, quietly, ruthlessly. It forces you to confront the parts of yourself you usually escape from through distraction and noise. When life finally becomes silent, you meet yourself. And many people cannot survive that meeting. That is why so many run toward anything that numbs the discomfort. Endless scrolling, toxic relationships, constant entertainment, fake ambition, temporary pleasures, anything to avoid sitting alone with uncertainty, anything to avoid hearing the terrifying question echoing inside their own mind: what if nothing ever changes? That question has destroyed more dreams than failure ever could. Because uncertainty creates exhaustion, not physical exhaustion, soul exhaustion, the kind where even simple things begin to feel heavy. You wake up tired, you move through the day disconnected. You smile around people while carrying storms inside your chest, and nobody notices because externally your life still looks functional, but internally something is bleeding. The waiting becomes a wound because every delayed answer feels personal. Every unanswered prayer feels like rejection. Every year that passes without visible progress feels like proof that you were abandoned by life itself. You begin comparing your timeline to everyone around you. You watch people move ahead while you remain stuck in the same emotional prison. You see others finding love while you fight loneliness, others building success while you question your purpose, others celebrating milestones while you secretly wonder if your moment will ever arrive. Comparison poisons the spirit because it convinces you that timing equals worth. But life has never worked that way. Some people bloom early and disappear early. Others spend years underground before anyone sees the roots forming beneath the surface. And roots grow in darkness. That is the part nobody celebrates. Nobody applauds the invisible seasons. Nobody congratulates the person fighting battles internally while externally nothing seems to be happening. The world only rewards visible victories. But the deepest transformations happen where nobody can see them. In the waiting, inside the silence, inside the confusion, inside the painful moments where you are forced to continue walking without understanding where the road is leading. Because waiting strips illusions away. It reveals who you become when external validation disappears. It exposes whether your identity was built on applause or truth. And many people discover that without constant progress, attention, or reassurance, they no longer know who they are. That realization creates panic. Suddenly life feels meaningless because society trained people to worship movement instead of alignment, to chase achievement instead of purpose, to value speed instead of depth. But some souls are intentionally delayed because they are being prepared for burdens smaller minds could never carry. A tree that grows too fast develops weak roots, and weak roots collapse under pressure. Maybe the reason your journey slowed down was because your spirit needed strengthening before elevation could safely arrive. Maybe the loneliness was teaching discernment. Maybe the heartbreak was teaching detachment. Maybe the uncertainty was teaching trust beyond visible evidence. Because anyone can believe when life makes sense, but only transformed people continue moving when everything feels hidden. The wound of waiting also reveals how addicted people are to control. Humans want timelines, guarantees, predictability. They want to know exactly when things will happen and how everything will unfold. But life rarely gives answers that way. Instead, it asks for surrender first. And surrender terrifies the ego. The ego wants certainty before action. The soul moves through faith, even when certainty never arrives. That is why waiting feels like death to the version of you built on control. Piece by piece, the illusion breaks apart. The false identities crumble. The masks stop working. Eventually you become too exhausted to pretend anymore. Too tired to chase meaningless approval. Too drained to continue performing for a world that never truly saw you. And somewhere inside that exhaustion, something deeper begins awakening. Not excitement, not motivation, awareness. You begin realizing the waiting was not destroying you. It was exposing everything inside you that could not survive the next version of your life. Because if everything you desired had arrived immediately, you would have entered it emotionally unprepared. The pressure would have broken you. The attention would have consumed you. The blessings would have become burdens because your inner foundation was still unstable. So life slowed you down, not to punish you, to rebuild you from the inside. And that rebuilding process often feels unbearable because transformation rarely feels beautiful while it is happening. Most of the time it feels lonely, confusing, unfair, and invisible. Most of the time it feels like being buried when you are actually being planted. There is a fire inside certain people that refuses to die no matter how much life tries to bury it. A strange kind of fire. One that survives heartbreak, betrayal, failure, rejection, isolation, and disappointment. A fire that continues burning quietly beneath the surface, even during seasons where everything appears broken. And if you have ever felt that fire inside yourself, then you already know how exhausting it can be, because sometimes you do not want to keep fighting. Sometimes you want the voice inside you to finally become silent. Sometimes you wish you could live like everyone else, distracted, numb, comfortable, unaware. You wish you could stop feeling everything so deeply. Stop questioning everything. Stop carrying this constant ache that tells you there is more waiting for you beyond the life you are currently living. But the fire refuses to die, no matter how many times you try to ignore it. No matter how many times you settle, no matter how many times fear convinces you to shrink yourself, the fire always returns. That is because purpose does not disappear, simply because life becomes painful. In fact, pain often reveals purpose more clearly than comfort ever could. Comfort makes people sleepy. Pain forces people awake. and some of the strongest souls are born inside seasons that almost destroyed them. Think about your own life. How many times have you survived situations you thought would completely break you? How many nights did you believe you had nothing left emotionally, yet somehow you still woke up and kept moving? How many times did you lose everything familiar, only to discover a stronger version of yourself hidden beneath the ruins? That strength did not come from nowhere. It came from the fire. The fire is what keeps certain people searching for truth, even after disappointment. It is what keeps them hoping after betrayal. It is what keeps them creating after rejection. Most people abandon themselves the moment life becomes difficult. They compromise their soul for comfort. They trade authenticity for acceptance. They slowly silence the deepest parts of themselves just to fit inside environments that were never meant for them. But people carrying the fire cannot fully betray themselves without consequences. Their spirit becomes restless. Their mind becomes heavy. Their emotions become chaotic. Because the fire was never designed to let them sleep peacefully inside a false life. That is why some people feel constant tension inside ordinary routines. They try to convince themselves they are satisfied, but internally something keeps screaming that they are meant for more. Not necessarily more money or fame, but more truth, more meaning, more alignment with who they actually are beneath the mask society taught them to wear. And the frightening part is that the fire often isolates people before it elevates them. Because once you begin waking up internally, many relationships stop making sense, conversations become shallow, environments feel draining, old identities begin collapsing. You start realizing how much of your life was built around survival instead of authenticity. That realization changes everything. Suddenly you cannot unsee the patterns around you. You notice how many people are living disconnected from themselves, smiling externally while dying internally, performing happiness while secretly feeling empty, chasing approval because they never learned how to value themselves without external validation. And once the fire inside you recognizes that emptiness, it becomes impossible to fully return to unconscious living. You may try, you may distract yourself for a while, you may pretend the awakening never happened, but eventually the fire starts pulling at your spirit again. It whispers through your dissatisfaction, through your intuition, through the quiet voice telling you to stop abandoning yourself, because the fire is connected to truth. And truth is dangerous to the false versions of yourself built from fear, insecurity, and conditioning. Every time you grow, another illusion dies. Every time you become more authentic, another mask falls away. And while transformation looks inspiring from the outside, internally it often feels terrifying. Because growth requires death. Not physical death, identity death. The death of who you thought you had to become in order to be accepted. The death of pretending. The death of shrinking yourself to protect other people's comfort. The death of chasing lives that no longer align with your spirit. And every death hurts. That is why awakening often feels lonely. You begin outgrowing environments before discovering where you truly belong. You lose old versions of yourself before fully meeting the new one emerging inside you. There are moments where you feel suspended between two identities, no longer connected to the old life, but not yet fully grounded in the new one. That space feels unstable, but it is also sacred, because that is where the fire reshapes people, not through comfort, through pressure. Pressure reveals character. Pressure reveals hidden fears. Pressure reveals whether your spirit will collapse under resistance or become stronger because of it. And people carrying the fire often survive things that should have destroyed them because something deeper keeps rebuilding them from within. Even when they lose direction, the fire remains. Even when they lose confidence, the fire remains. Even when the entire world misunderstands them, the fire remains. That is why certain people can never fully give up. They may pause. They may struggle. They may fall into dark seasons where motivation disappears completely. But eventually something inside them rises again, not because life became easier, because the fire refuses extinction, and the more they try to silence it, the louder it becomes. through dreams, through intuition, through emotional discomfort, through sudden realizations that shake them awake in the middle of ordinary moments. The fire keeps reminding them that they were not born merely to exist mechanically inside routines that suffocate their soul. They were born to become who they truly are before fear convinced them to forget. Most people never answer the signal. They hear it for a moment, usually during silence, heartbreak, exhaustion, or some painful turning point in life. But instead of listening, they run back toward distraction, back toward noise, back toward comfort. Because answering the signal requires something most people are terrified of: change, real change, not motivational quotes, not temporary inspiration, not pretending to become someone new for a few days before slipping back into old patterns. The signal demands transformation at the deepest level. It asks you to abandon the identities that kept you emotionally safe but spiritually trapped. It asks you to stop performing and start becoming, and that terrifies the ego. Because the ego survives through familiarity, even when familiarity is destroying you. Think about how many people stay inside lives that drain them simply because the pain is predictable. Predictable misery feels safer than uncertain growth, so they remain asleep. They repeat the same emotional cycles, the same self-sabotage, the same excuses, the same fears, year after year, until numbness becomes their entire personality. But every once in a while, someone hears the signal and cannot ignore it anymore. Something inside them begins waking up, not all at once, slowly, painfully. Like someone opening their eyes after sleeping for years, they begin questioning everything they once accepted automatically. The routines, the relationships, the beliefs, the endless chase for approval. Suddenly the life they built no longer feels aligned with who they are becoming internally. The things that once distracted them stop working. Empty conversations become exhausting. Fake friendships become unbearable. Achievements without meaning begin feeling hollow. That awakening creates conflict. Because once your spirit wakes up, you can no longer fully participate in unconscious living without feeling internal resistance. You start noticing how many people are disconnected from themselves, how many are living according to fear instead of truth, how many are sacrificing authenticity just to avoid rejection. And the frightening part is realizing you were doing the same thing for years. Maybe your entire identity was built around survival. Maybe you became whoever others needed you to be. Maybe you learned to shrink your emotions, silence your intuition, and suppress your real desires because acceptance felt more important than truth. That realization hurts because it forces you to confront the distance between the life you are living and the life your soul has been calling you toward. The signal always exposes that distance. It whispers through dissatisfaction, through restlessness, through moments where success still feels empty because externally you achieved things while internally abandoning yourself. People often think awakening feels exciting. Most of the time it feels uncomfortable because awareness destroys illusions, and illusions are addictive. Illusions allow people to avoid responsibility for their own transformation. As long as they stay distracted, they never have to confront their fear. Never have to confront the wounds they keep hiding beneath entertainment, work, relationships, or constant busyness. But once the signal becomes impossible to ignore, distractions stop numbing the deeper ache. The soul starts demanding honesty. You begin realizing that many of your choices were rooted in fear instead of alignment. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of being misunderstood, fear of standing alone. Fear of becoming too different from the people around you, so you stayed asleep. Not because you lacked potential, because awakening carries a cost. And the cost is separation from everything false. False identities, false relationships, false ambitions, false comfort. The signal does not ask whether you are ready before disrupting your life. It arrives the moment your spirit can no longer tolerate unconscious existence. Sometimes it comes through heartbreak, sometimes through burnout, sometimes through loss, loneliness, or emotional collapse. Suddenly the life that once felt manageable becomes unbearable because internally you are no longer the same person, and that is where many people turn back. They feel the discomfort of transformation and immediately run toward old habits again. They return to distractions because awakening feels too lonely, too uncertain, too demanding. Remaining asleep seems easier than rebuilding an entire identity from truth. But the problem is this: once you hear the signal clearly, ignoring it creates suffering of its own. You can feel it when you betray yourself. You can feel it when you stay inside environments your soul has already outgrown. You can feel it when you continue performing roles that no longer align with your spirit. Something inside begins dying slowly. Not your body, your aliveness. Because human beings are not meant to live disconnected from their deeper truth. And the longer someone ignores the signal, the heavier life becomes emotionally. Anxiety grows. Restlessness grows. Emptiness grows. Not because they are broken, but because their soul is resisting the prison they keep forcing it to remain inside. Answering the signal requires courage most people never develop. The courage to walk away from what no longer aligns. The courage to disappoint people who benefited from your smaller version. The courage to stop pretending. The courage to rebuild your life around truth instead of approval. And perhaps the hardest courage of all, the courage to trust yourself after years of abandoning your own intuition. Because the signal does not provide every answer immediately. It simply calls you toward awakening. One step at a time. One realization at a time. One painful layer of truth at a time. You begin shedding identities that were never really yours. You begin recognizing patterns that kept you trapped emotionally. You begin reconnecting with the parts of yourself buried beneath fear and conditioning. And slowly, the fog starts lifting. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect. Because you finally stop resisting who you were always becoming underneath the noise. If this message resonated with you, it means something inside you is already waking up and refusing to stay silent any longer. Don't ignore that feeling, because most people lose themselves by dismissing the very signals meant to guide them forward. Take this as your reminder to stay aware, stay honest with yourself, and keep moving toward the version of you that feels real, not comfortable. If this spoke to your situation even a little, subscribe for more and comment your thoughts below, because your voice matters more than you think right now, and your journey is just beginning.